We're going to break into testimony real quick here on the Law and Crime Network to introduce Francey Hakes. She's a former federal prosecutor who now works as a consultant. Francey, good to see you here.
Thanks, Aaron. Good to be with you.
So we've got this interesting case right now from North Carolina. It's not a murder case. It's basically an official corruption case. There are, in theory, 3 either district attorneys or former district attorneys in the room right now. One is prosecuting the case, one's in the defendant's chair, and one is in the witness chair right now. I can't say as though I've seen that, but truth is stranger than fiction.
You know, Aaron, I don't think I've seen that either, I have to admit. And it is stranger than fiction that there's this many DAs and former DAs all involved in the same case.
Yeah, I mean, one is prosecuting it. He's the disinterested one. And the case just wound up in Raleigh, North Carolina, because it happens to be where the administrative office of the courts in that state is located. We heard that in opening statements this morning. So under the law, that's the proper venue where a case needs to be brought if there's some attempt to defraud the state system. And that, of course, is what's alleged here. You've got a defendant, Wallace Bradsher, who's accused in this sort of bizarre wife swapping of employment scheme where Bradsher had his wife working for him for about 4 years. And then this guy who's on the witness stand wanted to hire his own wife and went and got an ethics opinion about it because he knew the neighboring DA was doing it. And the ethics people said, oh, no, you can't do that. And then he called Bradsher up and said, well, why do you get to do it and I don't? And then it sent everything into a tailspin, I guess you could say. And it resulted in them sort of hiring one another's wives, and then it snowballed from there.
It's really interesting, Aaron, because it looks very much like this witness is trying to make it seem like in the beginning it was a legitimate job for both women. And then I'm not quite sure what happened. I'm not quite sure when the criminal conduct took place. The testimony isn't quite as clear on that as I would like.
Exactly. And, you know, there was one piece of testimony out of this witness who really is the state's star witness because he's the one who's apparently admitted to being part to some of these conversations. Okay. You know, was in cahoots with the neighboring DA. That's the accusation. But 1 or 2 things that he said, if my memory from the opening statements this morning serves me correctly, contradicted what we were promised in opening statements by the state. You know, the state tried to make this sound like it was a scheme that they both sort of cooked up at once and they were both involved. But this witness said he was nervous about his pay cut, so he went to the defendant and said, how do I do this? It was as if he was really driving the bus here more so than the defendant. And then we wind up in this situation where we often wind up, where the question for the jury is, did the state really go after the key person in this prosecution? And of course, the defendant, who's representing himself, he's a seasoned attorney, turned around and said, this is the guy they should have been going after, is the guy sitting in the witness chair right there.
Well, and that's the problem with co-defendant testimony. You're always going to have each defendant pointing the finger at the other as being the mastermind or being the more culpable person. But what this witness Blitzer said on the witness stand was so interesting because he certainly made it seem like for a significant period of time, and maybe even until Mrs. Bradsher quit at his office, each woman was legitimately doing work for the opposite county.
Yeah, it's sort of, what's the quote, we don't know what a tangled web we weave until we first practice to deceive or something like that. But I'm looking at this saying, okay, you've got these women working for one another, but then they start working from their home county. So then that witness's wife was really on the defendant's payroll while she was working out of his office. And let's talk about the conflict situation here. And just to let viewers know, that case is indeed wrapping up right at 5 o'clock like we thought it would. The judge promised that earlier today, that they wrap up at about 5 o'clock. But look, I'm trying to go through the conflict thing here because they keep talking about these conflict cases being farmed out to neighboring counties. And that's common. The general presumption of legal conflict is if you have a conflict or someone in your office has a conflict, then the conflict covers everyone and that office can't touch it. But what's sort of weird here is that I'm getting lost, or I shouldn't say lost, but I'm perceiving, and if I'm perceiving this correctly, that despite the conflicts, the staffers were jumping across the conflict chasm and still working on the case somehow. Did you pick that up as well or not?
Yeah, Aaron, I mean, I think it was really confusing. You had this, if I remember correctly, Shockley. You had this Shockley murder case, this child homicide that originated in, or the murder itself took place in Rockingham. So that was the venue. That's the jurisdiction. But this DA, Blitzer, felt like he might have a conflict of interest. So he asked Bradsher if Bradsher's office would prosecute it. And of course, Bradsher's office agreed. But then Blitzer's wife was working on that case from Blitzer's office, even though it was now Bradsher's case in the other counties. You're right. It was very circular and strange sounding.
And that's the sort of thing that normally the conflict authorities, just from a pure fairness to a defendant standpoint, would say, no, that shouldn't be going on. This whole thing is very, very bizarre. But look, the defendant in his own opening statement this morning said that this is all wrong, that the state has got its theory of the case all wrong, and that really the guy that they should have been going after was the guy sitting in the witness chair who already pled to one of the charges. You know, he's turning around saying, look, you got the wrong guy. Why are you coming after me? And legally, he said that when he asked years and years ago, remember the defendant's wife was working for him for about 4 years, he turned around and said that he was given permission to because he was a constitutional officer and therefore wasn't covered by this ethics law. I want to hear more about that, Francey. I don't know about you.
Well, every state has different ethics laws, and that's one of the things that's interesting about this case. Although if I could just sideline for a second here, one of the worst things I heard today was actually what Blitzer was talking about with respect to that child homicide case. His office was conflicted out, and yet he knowingly, and Bradsher knowingly, had Blitzer's wife still working on that case, even if she was employed supposedly by Bradsher's office. That's also a clear conflict to have the DA's wife working on a homicide case that he felt his office was conflicted out of. So I'm concerned that that's going to have very deleterious effects on that particular prosecution as it goes to the appeal stages.
I agree. It makes me wonder exactly what's going on there. Is this just the tip of the iceberg in this part of that state in North Carolina? But Francey Hakes, former federal prosecutor, we're going to wrap up here on Law and Crime. Appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you, Aaron.
And a reminder, everybody, we've got a couple of things we're watching right now. The Sesmas case in Wichita, Kansas is probably set to wrap up very soon. That's still going on, though, as we speak at this second, but it might not be going on for very long. So go to our website if you want to keep watching that. We're going to say goodbye. We'll see you back here tomorrow on Law and Crime.